Hello, everybody.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about, as we have the past, I think, maybe one or two Limitless qualifiers, but definitely the last one. We're going to talk about Limitless Q4, the very last of the big Limitless events that's currently on the schedule. I'm sure, let's be frank, the majority of us, including myself, are not really in the running to make it into the Invitational. Maybe a couple of you out there who are watching this are very much still in that running, but I think the majority of people who are going to be playing this weekend's tournament are just doing it because it's amazing to play in a massive tournament with a bunch of people. And yeah, maybe you think like, hey, I'm going to try to get a day two with 1,000 different players, and that's totally fair. So this video is going to talk about, based on the last weekend's results, how the meta may have changed a little bit, what decks are on top currently, what decks are maybe good decks that are going to be counters that you might see not in huge numbers, but in some numbers. And then I'm going to have two decks that I think are, I'm calling them underdog decks. They're certainly not unknown decks, but they're decks that have not really been played in the last Limitless event or other events in large numbers, but I think are well poised to do well in this tournament in the right hands. So without further ado, let's just get into the top decks. In the top decks, these two I think are super obvious. We have Dragapult. Dragapult's the first one we're going to talk about. Dragapult managed to win 4 major tournaments over this last weekend, and I am getting this information, a variety of different tournaments. There's PokeX had a couple, JGB has a tournament, Neilpai has their Sunday Open, and there's also a tournament called the Yokon Cup, I don't know, maybe a tournament out in Japan. But those are the 6 that I'm referring to, and I'm getting all of this information from both Cash Vendor. If you don't know him, he goes by Cashman on all of his socials. Awesome player, super knowledgeable, posts a lot of stuff. Definitely check him out. I'll put a link to his Twitter in the description. Also, I'm getting a bunch of lists from Neilpai's Sunday Open, which had 135-ish players total from juniors, seniors, and masters divisions. So definitely check out the Sunday Open Discord too. But that's where I'm getting all this information. So Dragapult. Dragapult won 4 different events, and the majority of the Dragapults that won those events, 3 out of the 4, did not play Malamar. Now, that might be surprising. It's certainly surprising to me. I did think that Malamar is probably the most consistent way to play it, but instead of Malamar, they're opting for a few things, and I think if you're planning on playing Dragapult, I think that there's 4 cards that you definitely want to have in your list. Some of them are obvious, and some of them I think are things that have emerged as other decks have gotten better. So obviously you want to play a bunch of hammers. Crushing hammers seem to be everywhere in Dragapult. I think you need to play crushing hammers. Additionally, you need to play the Giratina from Unified Minds. I think it's called Dimension Breach is the ability. But basically, when it comes onto the field, you can discard a special energy from your opponent's active. That works on Speed Lightning with Pikarom. That works on Dragapult's Horror Psychic Energy. That will work on an Aurora Energy or a Rainbow Energy with the Spiritomb. Whole number of different decks out there that it's going to work against. So you're going to play that. You're going to play Scoop Up Nets to maybe do that a couple of times. Additionally, what you're seeing in these decks you are seeing the Wobbuffet that prevents Prism Star Pokemon from attacking or having abilities. Obviously, this is largely there for Pikarom. If you can get this down on the field going first, turn 1, you prevent them from using Tapu Koko Prism Star. And in that scenario, there is, I don't believe, really any way that they can get off a turn 1 going second attack. Huge way to slow them down for that first turn so you can get off the first attack before they do. Wobbuffet, something you should consider for your decks. And the last thing that you've started to see creep into these decks, and I think it makes a lot of sense actually, is you've started to see power plants go into Dragapult decks. Now, this is pretty big deal for a lot of different decks out there. For itself, obviously, if you put a power plant down, you can't necessarily play your own Dedenne. But I think that's okay. Dragapult, if you are playing the Jirachis and Research or Marnie, you don't necessarily always need to Dene. So I think it's okay to play a couple of Power Plants. And what Power Plant does, well, it'll make your opponent's Zero Auras not give free retreat. It will stop your opponent's Denes from being usable. And then it has a lot of other additional benefits, right? It has the benefit of shutting off Mewtwo's ability. Now, it may not always be able to stick, but I think putting power plants in this deck is actually better than putting chaotic swells. You could maybe run a mix, but I would recommend putting in power plants if you're planning on playing Dragapult. Some of the best Dragapult decks that won played power plant, and I think they won partially because of that power plant. So definitely a consideration there. That is the Dragapult. Dragapult definitely still a top deck. Those are some of the key cards. Outside of that, I think there's a variety of things, but I think those are the 4 key techs, if you will, for the second best deck in the format right now, or the best deck, depending on your perspective, which is Pikarom. All of those changes to Dragapult were really there to counter Pikarom. And, Pikarom is Pikarom, right? It's not really running a lot of techs for Dragapult necessarily. Pikarom's whole, MO, method of operation, so to speak, is just to get that attack off as soon as possible, and then to power up your Pokemon and put your opponent into a position where they are on the back foot the rest of the game. Pikarom is super consistent in that respect. You have Electro Power. I don't really think of anything terribly crazy that Pikarom has. I mean, Fion, certainly a card you should consider if you think that you want to be using Tagvolt GX with 6 energy on as a way to take a bunch of prizes. That way you can move a Dragapult to the back with 100 plus damage, 150, 200 damage on it from maybe an E-Power or 2. But yeah, that I think is the only thing I could see. There's been some talk of Pikarom with Crushing Hammers. I just don't necessarily think it's that valuable. The deck space is better served for consistency, so I don't really know how much more Pikarom can do, but Pikarom, definitely another top deck. It was in the top 4 of, I'm looking at the list here, literally every event except one. There was one event, the Sunday Open actually did not have a top 4 Pikarom. There was a top 8 Pikarom, but there was not a top 4. A lot of that could just be to random matches, but Pikarom's still very represented in these top lists. So those are my 2 top decks. Now, you're not hearing other decks in there for a variety of reasons. You are not hearing ADP anything in there, partially because all of these techs that Dragapult has for Pikarom negatively impact things like ADP, as well as some of the counters that are coming about for Pikarom. So Pikarom's rise in popularity is actually negatively impacting ADP, I believe. So all these hammers, even if you run Energy Switch in your ADP, you're not guaranteed to get it. And if they keep crushing hammering you, even with Battle Saucers, you may not have the resources to get what you need. So yeah, I think that's making it suffer. And then from a Baby Blacephalon standpoint, look, Baby Blacephalon is always going to be a deck that can get it done, that can do really well. But I think it's just important to note, we have still not seen a Baby Blacephalon win any major event in this format, I don't think. I mean, granted, it's a young format, but still. It's a great deck. If you run hot, you will do well. But it suffers from inconsistency issues with Marnie, which a lot of these decks run Marnies, or Reset Stamp, which several of these decks might run Reset Stamp too. So I think that the more and more I think about it, I'm not putting Baby Blounds on that top tier anymore. I really think it is Dragapult, Pikarom on that top tier. So let's get into the counters, right? What are the biggest counter decks currently out there, and what should you expect to see? As you would imagine, the things that you are countering are Dragapult and Pikarom. So that's what you're going to see. You're going to see 2 decks that counter, each one of those respectively, one of which can counter both of them fairly well. The first one that you're seeing, which popped up, I think, from a Japanese list and got covered by Luke from Celios, as well as Zapdos TCG and all that other stuff. I've played around with it myself, is Aerodactyl. Aerodactyl GX is a fantastic counter to Pikarom because it does a number of things to it. Its ability makes it so that a basic Pokemon needs an extra energy to attack. So even in a deck that runs Thunder Mountain, you might stick a Pikarom there with 3 energy on, and if they don't have Thunder Mountain, they may not be able to attack, right? So Aerodactyl is very good for that. It also is fighting type Pokemon, so it hits Pikarom and Choo-Choo and basically everything on there for weakness. And so the version of Aerodactyl that I personally think is the best version is the Welder version. I played against Jake. He was playing a version of Aerodactyl. You might have seen my last video. He played a triple acceleration fighting energy version. I don't think that works. I just think if you saw the video, you are put into situations where if you're not behind on prizes significantly throughout the game, you only have 1 manual attachment a turn, and that's not enough after you've GX'd. So Welder version of Aerodactyl is, I think, the best version of that list. So that's what I would recommend if you are looking for a Pikarom counter specifically. It also does well against Baby Blounds, and it can certainly help against a variety of different decks. ADP even. If you put that out there with an ADP, an Aerodactyl, before they have Altered Creation, they need an extra energy to Altered Creation. They may not be able to get there. So variety of different decks that I think this really helps against. The second counter deck that you should maybe consider is a Spiritomb Ultra Beast deck. So it's a very interesting deck. It's the Ultra Beasts are back. Obviously Spiritomb is Darkness type, so it hits Dragapult for weakness. That is a huge benefit to this deck. Yes, your Spiritombs can get sniped, but so long as you are not personally putting the damage counters on, they will have to be selective in what they snipe. You're only giving up 1 prize each. And yes, you have to figure out how to play that. But Spiritomb does hit for weakness, and it's just a good Pokemon for a variety of other decks that you might play against. On top of that, you are going to be running the Baby Buzzwole for the Pikarom matchup. You are going to be running Nihilego for a variety of different matchups, but it also helps against things like Mewtwo. You're running your Jinxes, Shrine of Punishment, which also helps against Pikarom or ADP. So I think that this is a very good counter deck. I don't know if its matchup with Dragapult is good enough. I don't know if the prize trade situation is perfect, but I think it is a potentially very viable deck for this tournament. If you think you can play that Dragapult matchup well. So Spiritomb Ultra Beast is a great counter deck that has emerged over the last weekend. It did pretty well in the Sunday Open, and so I think there's a lot of potential for that deck going into Q4. Now, finally, the last little category of decks that I'm going to cover is what I'm calling the underdog decks. Decks that have had popularity in the past to one degree or another, fell off of popularity in the last qualifier, but I think are really well poised in the current meta to make a run. And the first deck that we're going to talk about is Mewtwo Welder. You think about Mewtwo Welder, and it has literally everything that it needs to do well in this meta. The main matchups that could be very bad for it are Baby Blacephalon. Baby Blacephalon is just a bad matchup for this deck, in my opinion. Maybe somebody out there has the perfect techs for it, other than Tapu Fini, but I think Baby Blacephalon is tough for this. Outside of that, though, Dragapult could have been tough, but what we are also seeing is we are seeing a return to Jirachi. So if you run Jirachi, the GX Jirachi, that makes it to where your Psychic type Pokemon, well, all Psychic types on the field, don't have weakness, I think this is potentially like a very good deck. Now, as I said before, you still have to worry about Power Plant with Dragapult. I think that's going to see more play, and so that would also turn off your protection from weakness, which basically means your Mewtwo's are going down to one-shots with a Zigzagoon ping. Not good. Not good. But I think this version is more consistent at protecting weakness than the Ultimate Mewtwo version, where you have to put a weakness card energy on. And the reason for that is Giratina from Unified Minds. I tried that. I'm sure other people out there who may have played it have tried it. They just take off the weakness guard energy with Giratina and hit you for weakness. So I think weakness guard is out of the picture for a Dragapult matchup, and Jirachi is in. Outside of that, it has good matchups with Pikarom. You can hit big numbers pretty easily with the Charizard GX from Hidden Fates. You have Magcargo GX to hit above that number. You even have Incineroar GX. The GX attacks on that one does, I believe it's 50 for each damage counter on the Pokemon. So if you're facing anything, Dragapult something that hits you for a number of damage but doesn't knock you out, for just 3 colorless energy, you can basically KO them after 7 damage counters. So I think that Mewtwo Welder is a very good option if you can build the right list. How many Chaotic Swells do you run? How many Hearths? I'm even seeing a list here that did well in the Sunday Open that had Island Challenge Amulets on it. We are not really seeing a lot of Tool Scrappers being run. So Island Challenge Amulet for your Dedennes on the bench is not a bad option. So that would be my first underdog deck that hasn't been played a lot, but is in a very good position to do well in Q4. The second of my underdog decks that I hate to say is in a good position going into Q4 is Control. Cinccino Control decks, or Cinccino Control. I think Control is in a potentially really good spot. Now, you still have the issue of Dragapult, right? And you also kind of have the issue in some instances of ADP. If they are able to get the attack off before you can set up and they just run through your attackers with boss's orders, that's not good. That's not good. So you do run that risk. But considering that the two other, like one of the top decks in the meta and other decks in the meta are also running lots of Crushing Hammers and Giratinas from Unified Minds, etc., you have a whole meta that's kind of designed to be somewhat control-y to begin with, to slow your opponent down. So while they are focused on slowing their opponent down, you can focus on slowing everybody down, including the ones that are slowing other people down. So that, I think, makes Control, that puts Control into a maybe good position in this format. Yeah, you're going to run your Articunos, you're going to run your Orangaroos, your Giraffarigs, your Pokedolls, all that stuff. But that's sort of my second underdog deck that I think, if in the right hands, could do well. I think the average player who is playing Control and is not super familiar with it, don't play it. You will not do well. I'm just going to be honest. I'm not going to play that. I don't play Control. I don't like it. I would not do well. If you are a player who is confident with Control, this might be a good weekend to bring that out. Yeah. So those are my top decks, counters, and underdogs. What do you think? What are you planning on playing for the Q4 of Limitless? Yeah, do you think I'm way off? Is there a deck that I have just ignored? Probably. But I really do think that based on the weekend's results, and just so you know, the last Q3 that I did, the meta analysis for Q3, we did talk about how Pikarom was probably going to be a really good deck for that event because of the prior weekend's results. So I do think looking into these weekend's results are important to predict this next weekend. Let me know what you think. Thank you all for watching this video. And yeah, I'll catch you in a future video as we prep for the Players Cup. See y'all then. Carpe awesome.